thank you very much. The war, such as it was, lasted 12 days. And from what we can gather, it was Israel that was pushing to end the war. And the main reason is Iran has missiles that can penetrate the Israel air defense system. And Israel was very hard hit in 3 regions: in the south in Beersheba, in the coast in Tel Aviv, and in the north in Haifa. And a lot of damage was done. We don't know exactly because military censors have, to some extent, limited our precise knowledge. But my view is there was a lot of damage and that Iran could inflict a lot more damage. What's true is that the bombing and the attacks by Israel also inflicted damage in Iran, so it wasn't just one way. But I don't believe that Russia and China and others would let Iran fall to an outright defeat. So I think that Israel cannot afford a long war. It can't win. It has wanted the United States to fight a long war, but the US can't fight a long war and doesn't want to. And in the United States public, there's no interest in this at all. So there were no voices of public opinion saying, we need to fight Iran. None. This was a totally elite, lobby-driven, political elite war. And most of Trump's own base was against this. Tucker Carlson was against this war. And Tucker Carlson has an audience of millions of people, and they listen. And the MAGA crowd is actually not militaristic. It doesn't like immigrants. There are many things that it likes or doesn't like, but it does not want a war. So I think you're right that the American view is very conflicted. Now, the U.S. or Trump maybe thought or was told, we can have a decisive effect in the short bombing by destroying Iran's nuclear capacity. I don't really know if he was told that. There is still debate about what happened with the US bombing. My own view is nothing happened with the US bombing. That's my own personal view. By that, I mean they may have destroyed one facility or damaged a facility, but Iran is a big country and they have centrifuges in many places. And my guess is that they got their nuclear material out of Fordo before the bombing because they had several days' notice and there was satellite observations of trucks moving in and out of the facility. So I don't believe that Iran lost its processed uranium, which is processed up to 60% and could easily be processed to nuclear arms level if they wanted to, which I don't think they do, but could be. So I don't think there was any strategic victory by the United States. I don't think there was any tactical advantage by the United States. I don't think Israel won anything. I think it was, if anything, a loss by Israel and the US. And Israel, and by that I mean Netanyahu, is probably pushing for some kind of revival of a longer war, but the United States is not interested. And Trump probably will resist that. Remember, by the way, in the US, the budget situation is bad, the social situation is bad, the public is not interested in any of this. So this is a lobbying-driven activity, and you're right in your observation that it is not feasible to maintain for a long period. It's similar to the Ukraine war in the same way. There is no interest of the American people in this war or in Ukraine, but for that matter. This is no cause for the American people. This is a deep state cause, and it's not explained to the American people at all. Our mass media support the government, but the public is against all of this. And the public doesn't matter in American decision-making very much, but it's against it.
I want to come back to your larger vision.
Much. And I think that if the United States were to try to apply such so-called secondary sanctions, again, China would respond in a way that would basically stop the U.S. economy. I don't think that the U.S. has the power to enforce such one-sided views. And this is what I was speaking about earlier. There's a lot of arrogance in general in Washington, and Trump is especially arrogant and not very intelligent also. So he believes, I think, what he's saying, but what he's saying makes no sense. And that's why when the first tariff increases came, with China, they lasted a couple of days. And China said no. And we're not back to any normal level, but the U.S. cannot impose such penalties. The rest of the world will just say to the U.S., okay, you're on your own. We don't need to trade with you. We'll trade with each other. You won't trade with us either. And so I don't believe that this is going to happen. The problem is Trump probably would like to stop the war, but he's unwilling to accept the explicit conditions for ending this war. For example, Trump should say to the American people, not just to Russia and to Ukraine, NATO will not enlarge. This was a mistake. This was a provocation. We will not support this anymore. He hasn't said that. He has said it privately to President Putin, supposedly. I think Witkoff has said it privately, I would guess. But publicly, Trump doesn't want to bear the political cost of peace. But that's the job of an American president, to explain to the American people, we made a mistake, actually. That's very hard. But Trump is not bad at it, because what he needs to say is, Obama made a mistake, Biden made a mistake, I never make a mistake, so I'm going to correct their mistake. Okay, we could then all roll our eyes, but we could actually get to peace. But I thought Trump was going to do that. But he stopped short of doing it. If you notice, the senators are even stupider than Trump, I'm sorry to say. Lindsey Graham, our #1 stupid politician in the world. Richard Blumenthal, my neighbor, because he lives in Connecticut, I live in New York, unbelievable. They're the ones pushing these sanctions and these tariffs. Because Richard Blumenthal, for example, is the lead supporter of the military-industrial complex. He's really gutless. He won't tell the truth to the American people. It's the job of a president to stop these wars. We've had a few good presidents, many mediocrities or terrible presidents, but the few good presidents know how to do this. But Trump, I'm afraid, I don't see it right now. I was more hopeful that he would know how to do it. The war, of course, should never have taken place, because there should never have been a coup in February 2014. Then there would have been no war. Then, after the coup, came the Minsk II agreement. That could have stopped the war also, autonomy for the Donbass. The West didn't accept that. No, we set the terms, not the Minsk II agreement, even though that was supported by the UN Security Council. So they cheated on that. Then President Putin said to President Biden in December 2021, here is a security arrangement. You stop NATO enlargement. Biden refused. I called the White House at the end of 2021 to talk to Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. I said, Jake, avoid a war. Say that NATO won't enlarge. He said, no, we can't say that. I said, why? He said, we have an open door policy. I said, oh, also in the Western Hemisphere, could Russia set up a military? No, Jeffrey. So I said, why don't you say that NATO won't enlarge? He said to me, don't worry, NATO won't enlarge. I said, Jake, NATO's not going to enlarge, but we're going to have a war over something that's not going to happen? He said, don't worry, there won't be a war. This is American government. It's like children, actually. This is so nonsensical, the conversations that I have experienced. They seem to know nothing. Or to say, don't worry, everything's fine. And then you have 3 years of war afterwards. So, to my mind, this war could have been avoided as late as January 2022. They blew it then. Then, when the war started, well, the war started in 2014, but when the special military operation started, within a week, Zelensky said, okay, we can be neutral. And within 2 weeks, the Istanbul process started. And I followed that. I flew to Ankara to talk to the Turkish negotiators, or mediators. There was a draft agreement, as you know, on April 15th, 2022, nearly complete. The US said, don't sign that, and Zelensky abandoned it. So the US has prevented peace from the beginning. And what you need today is a president who's willing to say the truth about how to make peace. I'm not saying, by the way, that every single condition that the Russian government has set down needs to be followed or would be followed or should be followed. But the broad contours for sure, no NATO enlargement, Crimea's never going back to Ukraine, I guarantee it. Never, because it's been home to the Russian fleet since 1783. And the purpose of the coup, in part, was to grab Crimea away from the Russian fleet. And it's not going to be allowed. And the purpose of the Minsk agreement was to give Donbass some relief, and the West blew that too. So what Russia's saying, to my mind, makes a lot of sense, but not necessarily in every detail of negotiation. But the president needs to engage the American people truthfully, to say these are the terms in which the war will stop. He needs to tell Ukraine, sorry, we're not fighting for these principles anymore. You're not going to be part of NATO. It's not going to happen. It's a bad idea, because we would never let Russia set a military base in Mexico. Never. We never let Mexico set Russia set a military base in Canada. And when the Soviet Union tried in Cuba, we almost had nuclear war. So we're not going to do it, he has to tell the Ukrainians publicly. But he's a weak president. And this is the big problem. You need a strong leader who can make peace. Peace isn't just the absence of war. It's more than that, to quote Spinoza. The answer to your question is the war will continue until the United States does something sensible, which is to say publicly with Russia, here are security arrangements that we can both live with, and then say to the Europeans and Ukraine, the fighting has to stop. And this is the basis. And then go to the UN Security Council and get a unanimous vote of the UN Security Council on a peace framework that is globally backed. On the question of why the United States aligns so closely with Israel, or with what the government in Israel wants, I think that there are three explanations. The first is that the U.S. security state views Israel as part of the security apparatus of the United States. And the links between the CIA and Mossad, for example, are very deep, very operational, and very long-term. So the military-industrial complex or the neoconservative movement views Israel as a major strategic ally. There's also, of course, the Zionist lobby, so-called, which is an ideological lobby that supports the cause of Israel, whatever the government of Israel is saying is the cause of Israel. And there are two different Israel lobbies, or Zionist lobbies, which are quite interesting. One is a Christian lobby, or Christian support for Israel, which is politically very powerful in the United States for very bizarre reasons, in my opinion, but in some versions of Christianity, especially what we call Protestant evangelical Christianity, the belief is that the Jewish state is part of the prophecy of God that must be fulfilled in order to bring the return of Jesus Christ. So it's a very religious idea. It's an interpretation of the last book of the Christian Bible, the book of Revelation, and it's a very influential idea among one group of Christians, not Catholics, not many other Christian groups, but one group. That group has millions of Americans in it. And by my count, more than 40% of Trump's voters were part of that Christian, Protestant, evangelical group. They are very pro-Israel. And they're pro-Israel because of a book written 2,500 years ago, not because of events today. But they interpret today's events as prophecies by God. It's a little strange, but it's true. Then there's the Jewish lobby, because Israel is a Jewish state, and most American Jews have supported Israel, and many American Jews are wealthy and in positions of influence and major campaign contributors and major supporters of Israel. By number, the number of Jews is much, much, much smaller than the number of Christian evangelicals. It's 10 to 1. So it's a huge difference. But in terms of social, political weight, it's a major grouping as well. So it's hard to evaluate exactly where this influence comes from entirely. There's also theories that Israel has successfully blackmailed many American politicians. That's what this so-called Epstein affair is about, because the claim, which I find to be believable, is that Epstein was a Mossad agent that was being used to blackmail the American political class, or much of it. I think this is quite plausible, although I don't know, I can't prove it, but it's well documented in many ways. So there are many ways that this lobby has influence, but saying all of that it's very detrimental to American interests. And a president that truly represented American interests would say no to this pressure. And that was what Trump claimed he would do. He said, I will put America first. If he put America first, he would tell the Israeli government, we're not going to go to war for you. We're not going to provide you weapons for slaughtering Palestinian people. We're going to support a two-state solution. But he doesn't say that. And the question is exactly what pressure he feels, or what ideology he maintains, or what payments somebody is making. But I think there's a bit of a mystery in this, or maybe all of those pressure points are being felt. When it comes to Iran, the United States has been at war with Iran effectively since 1953, or at war with the Iranian people. So 72 years ago, the U.S. overthrew a government. Then it installed a police state from 1953 to 1979. That's a long time. That led to a lot of resentment. Then when the Iranian Revolution came, the U.S. supplied Iraq with weapons to kill Iranians. That went on for a few years. So this attitude towards Iran is very long-standing. I, of course, know many Iranian leaders. I had the chance to meet with President Pezeshkian when he came to the United Nations last September. I've been to Tehran. I know Iranian diplomats. They have tried to make peace with the United States for at least 10 years, very actively. But Israel has blocked those peace efforts by the United States. And in fact, of course, an agreement was reached, the JCPOA agreement with Iran, which then Trump vetoed or abandoned. So this story is, again, a story of the true American interest is peace with Iran, but the Israeli government, because of its militant attitude, which is overthrow governments that oppose us rather than support a two-state solution, has blocked diplomacy. Iran, of course, should have no trust of the United States under these circumstances. So the only way that it could conceivably work, and it hasn't worked, would be through the UN Security Council. So an agreement would be reached in which Russia and China would be guarantors, as well as the European countries. In the Security Council, France and Britain. This approach could conceivably work, but we're far from it right now because Trump is not pursuing diplomacy with Iran, as far as we know. And if they came close to a diplomatic agreement, Israel would do everything possible to stop it. It would go bomb Iran again. It would raise the political heat in Washington. And the main thing the United States needs to do is to tell Israel, stop it. We are not your vassal state. You don't have to be our vassal state, but we are not blindly supporting you in your completely erroneous, illegal, and violent foreign policy. That's what I advocate every day, that the United States tell Israel, this game is over. Now we're going to represent peace, not represent you. You will benefit from peace, but not by us fighting your wars anymore, but only by you living side by side with the Palestinian people.
Thank you very much, Professor Johnny, for hosting this great dialogue. Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for your brilliant speech. I would like to say to ask you about Ukraine and tariffs.
Yeah.
Last week, the American President Donald Trump said that the U.S. will impose 100% tariffs on Russia and its trade partners, probably including China, if within 50 days Moscow and Washington do not reach an agreement on the Ukrainian crisis. Previously, Trump's policy uh, showed that Trump's policy towards China and Brazil, for example, showed that not everybody in the world listens to his decrees, especially in social media. And now it's going to strike on Bruce's countries. So, what do you think about these new threats? How will it end up? This is my first question. And second one is how do you see the end of the Ukraine war from today's perspective? Thank you.
I don't think the threats mean very much. I think the European situation is rather surprising in that Europe lacks any effective diplomacy right now. That's true vis-a-vis China and true vis-a-vis Russia. They meet with President Zelensky every day, but that's not diplomacy. This is a failure of diplomacy. There's no negotiation between Europe and Russia to find a security arrangement, which would not be hard to find, actually. At the same time, and what are the problems? There are multiple problems, but one of the problems is there's no Europe as Europe still. So the European Union is not really a union in the end of the day. It hasn't made a real unification. It's too weak. Foreign policy is still the prerogative of individual countries, and the countries are quite divided in outlook. There's also there are many puzzles, by the way, on this, I have to say, because I know these countries very well. I know their governments well. They tell me things in private that are opposite of what they say in public. So I find the whole situation very unnerving and a big failure for Europe, as you just heard. When it comes to Europe and China, part of the problem is that Europe blindly follows the U.S. Part of the problem is Europe is, again, not well led right now, because Europe's interests are trade with China for sure. This, no question. This would be the key for Europe to actually recover some economic dynamism. The United States resists that, and many countries just follow the U.S. And Europe, many European governments are confused about this. What I believe, one of the things I hope could be the case is that actually some of the other independent actors in this drama in Eurasia could help to bring Europe and China effectively closer together. And I'll give you one little example. I was in Central Asia last week and meeting with especially the government of Uzbekistan. They have the concept of the 5 Central Asian countries, which is Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, forming a middle corridor that connects China and Europe, because this is the old Belt Silk Road, and they want to form a transport and digital and environmental corridor, which makes a lot of sense. So I advise them, of course, ask China to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative, ask Europe to participate in their global gateway, and say to both sides, we'd like the two of you to work together on this common effort. in other words, Central Asia could be kind of a little bit of a magnet pulling Europe and China into a common practical effort because they're in between and they need both sides. I don't know whether this will work, but it's what I am going to try to promote. In other words, find practical ways for Europe and China to work together on the infrastructure, the modernization of Eurasia, the investment in green technology and so forth, and put aside the ideological claims and so forth, and try to get practical and very operational. So I'm not giving up on Europe in this, but Europe is not an effective partner with China right now because of their internal divisions, their ideology, their dependence on the United States, their fear factor, their arrogance. First of all, I've not made forecasts to 2100, but I am working quantitatively on trying to assess a world scene to 2050. So I'm trying to take a 25-year forward view. And in that 25-year view, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but the United States economic share measured at purchasing power parity comes to something like 11%. So it's not that it's down to nothing or down to just population parity. It still is a rich region, much above the average world GDP per person, but yes, not in any sense dominant. And I think it's already true, of course, as we know, the BRICS 10 countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, UAE, Iran, and Indonesia, are 41% of world output, according to IMF 2024 data, compared to the G7, which is, maybe 36%. So already eclipsing the G7 significantly. And now there are more BRICS partners. So I think the diminishing is going to happen. It may not be attractive, but it is going to happen. It's true that my vision is not really aimed at the satisfaction of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. I don't know what their views are, but my view is, so what? I agree, but you're right in terms of analytical view of how the reaction would be. The world cannot be operated for the benefit of 20 centibillionaires who have this crazy net worth that means very, very little. As an economist, I look at not the shares, but at the levels in the sense of will the U.S. be well off in such a world? Will average Americans be well off? And the answer is, if we do the right things, life expectancy will be much higher, income per capita will be much higher, the benefits of AI will really reach a lot of the population. And the fact that other parts of the world are sharing in those benefits does not detract, in my opinion, from the benefits that American people would have in having high living standards. If you are an IR specialist, though, you view the world differently. You're not interested in the level of well-being, you're interested in the gap of power. And yes, the gap is much reduced. To my mind, that's good. To the mind of an American strategist, that's terrible. You're making another argument that to the mind of at least the rulers of the United States, it's absolutely bad, because not only will others catch up, but the exorbitant privileges of the United States will diminish. So that could be true. that it would mean less prerogatives for the U.S. But I have to say the prerogatives for the U.S. are not very impressive. The prerogatives are the right to have wars, the right to overthrow governments, the right to borrow debt up to very high limits and then find yourself in a mess. I don't really feel that the prerogatives of being an empire are such great benefit. So I would argue to the American people, that scenario is not bad for you. It's actually better than the one that we're on. It may keep you from getting blown up. It will be higher living standards for you on average than the alternative. And what are you really getting out of being an empire? To my mind, not very much. So that's the argument that I would make. But I take your point that this vision doesn't work for those who see power either for its own sake or for exorbitant advantages that are otherwise unavailable. And I think we need to take that into account. So I think you're right about that. And to the extent that the U.S. is run by its billionaire class, we're in for a lot of trouble. I'll tell you on the Israel-Palestine issue what I'm proposing.
Yeah, I read some articles.
Yes, but whether it is achievable or not is another matter. So first of all, I don't believe that the Israeli government or the Israeli political process will ever accept a state of Palestine. So I'm not looking for negotiation between Israel and Palestine. We saw that play out many times. And for one way or another, it was always blocked. Either the Israelis just refused to implement what they had agreed. For instance, the Oslo process was basically killed because Israel would not continue to do what was supposed to be done under the agreement. Or the leader, in the case of Yitzhak Rabin, was murdered by an extremist who opposed the two-state solution. And Netanyahu has a 30-year career as prime minister. 29 years ago, he came to power as prime minister, completely dedicated to one idea: no state of Palestine. And his approach is overthrow any government in the region that threatens that control by Israel over Palestine. So in this sense, I don't believe negotiations can work. But I do want to use the UN to force the outcome. How to do that? Not simple. But my proposal is that we have a vote which admits Palestine to the UN as a member state, the 194th member state, on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, which is what international law declares to be Israel's borders. So the borders before the Six-Day War. Such an invitation to the UN is not only feasible, it has been tried twice, and the US blocked it 2 times. In 2011, Palestine applied for membership. It was supported by 14 of the 15 members of the Security Council, and the United States told the Palestinians, don't push the case, take observer status, and then in a few years we'll grant you membership. This was a lie. So they accepted observer status, no membership. Then this came up for a vote in 2024 again, because the Palestinians said, now we really want it. And this time the vote was 12 in favor, 2 abstentions, and 1 veto by the United States. So my interpretation simply is that the United States is the barrier, not Israel. Because if the United States doesn't veto this, Palestine becomes a member state, and Israel has nothing to say about that. Of course, the next day, Israel remains an occupying force, illegally, with a Palestinian state at a certain border. So it's not the end of the story, but it would signal to the Israelis and to the world and to the Palestinians there can be no reversal but a state of Palestine. Never in UN history has a state been eliminated. Of course, China replaced the seat in 1971, but other than that, no state has ever been a member that has been thrown out. So to my mind, if Palestine is admitted, it becomes a reality. Then there are the problems of the Israeli settlers in the West Bank, which is probably 600,000, and another 200,000 in East Jerusalem, and the mess in Gaza. But my idea is that, practically speaking, the whole world, other than Israel and the United States, agree that there should be a normal Palestinian state and Israel should live within its borders, which, by the way, is 78% of the original British mandate of Palestine. So they get a very good deal out of this. Thank you, Israel. And I think that establishing the state of Palestine, agreeing with the Arab countries and Iran that there can be normalization with Israel when Israel accepts this, will step by step lead to an outcome of peace. Not immediately solving everything. Many of these settlers are very extreme. They're armed. They are not going to peacefully settle this issue. So it's many years. I would say the settlers will remain in Palestine even after Palestine exists, and that will go on for some time. So this crisis won't end quickly. But I would like to signal to the Israeli people and the Israeli government, you will not rule over the Palestinian people in the long term. They will have their own state. They will live side by side with you. Get on with reality. So I think that that step actually could make a very important contribution. All that requires is a change of one vote, which is the United States. And my argument to Washington and to everybody in public debate is that this is the only way actually to make Israel secure. It's the only way to make peace in the region. And it's in the interest of the United States because 185 countries agree with this right now. And so the US has isolated itself on behalf of Israel to America's detriment. So the current policy is no favor to the United States. It's not even any favor to Israel, in my view. And almost all the world opposes it. So the only point I'm making is I would not leave this to Israel to decide. I would impose this on Israel by a vote of the UN Security Council, which is under international law a feasible action to take, a very direct action to take. When it comes to India and Pakistan, this is another terrible, unending crisis. It all goes back to, well, it all goes back, of course, to 1947, and it goes back to a failure of India to implement agreements over a vote in Kashmir that goes back already for 75 years. So this is a long-standing issue. It's also, we didn't talk about that conflict, it's two nuclear powers, very dangerous.